Hello and welcome to the 2021 edition of the State of the Union organized by the European University Institute in Florence. My name is Ivan Vejvoda and I'm a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, where I lead the Europe's Futures Fellowship project. This fringe event is organized together with the Institute for Human Sciences, and I'd like to very briefly introduce our eminent panel. I'll start with Professor Ioannis Armakolas, who is a senior fellow at Enlargement, a Greek think tank dealing with foreign policy. He's also a professor at the University of Macedonia in Thessaloniki. Judy Dempsey, who's a senior fellow at Carnegie Europe, and she is a former renowned journalist for many world newspapers, and she's speaking from Berlin. We then have Teresa Reiter, who is speaking to us from Vienna. She is currently a Europe's Futures Fellow. She was a staffer at the Austrian Parliament and many other things. Last but not least, Srdjan Cvic, a senior fellow at the Open Society European Policy Institute. And as you see, he has lying behind him, which his father put up 2 decades ago to show his Europeanness in the middle of Belgrade. That flag still flies on their terrace. We are going to talk about the geopolitics of EU enlargement and democracy. There was a panel this morning that dealt with the soft power of the European Union. We're going to try and ask some basic questions. This is all about anchoring the Western Balkans, which are 6 countries, 18 million people, and to continue the European peace political project of finding peace and stability on the geography of Europe. Is the EU living up to its intention of being a geopolitical force, and I would add a geo-economic force? And is it in the end about the credibility of the project itself, if the EU is capable or incapable of going through with this? I will start with a round of questions to our 4 panelists, and I will actually start with Judy. Judy, thank you so much for being with us. Why do you think the EU enlargement is of such geopolitical relevance in the current state of affairs, in particular with regard to the upholding of key democratic values and the rule of law, which we know are backsliding in a certain number of member states?
Thank you, Ivan, for this unbelievably difficult question. And good evening, panelists, and good evening, everybody out there, or good morning or good afternoon. I was reflecting on this question, and I think this question is related to the consequence of enlargement. Enlargement was based on the euphoric and idealistic element of reuniting Europe one and free and united. And the problem is, and I think the rule of law sometimes epitomizes this, is that some of the countries in Central Europe have approached Europe completely differently from the old Europe, which saw the origins of the origins of the European Union based on literally a peace project, based on values, based on democracy, and based on a very special view of history. And I think what we're seeing now is an unbelievably complex, unarticulated divide between some countries in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, the old and the new, and they still are new. And I deal particularly with Poland. Hungary is a different case. It's about the issue of sovereignty. And the rule of law has become embroiled in this unbelievably difficult issue of sovereignty. Because when the countries of the former communist countries, the Central European countries, and there were many of them, 8 joined at one block, the Baltic states, Poland, Hungary, Slovenia, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and they joined together, but they ceded sovereignty to the EU And I would argue that they didn't internalize what this loss of sovereignty meant. And we have this situation today where, for many reasons, I think it goes back to the financial crisis of 2009, it goes back to the migration crisis, you can take any crisis, but there's now a serious tug of war, a legal tug of war between the definition of sovereignty, the expression of the legal competences of the EU versus the legal competences of the member states. And in the case of Poland particularly, Hungary a little, we get it in various degrees in the other countries, there's now a serious clash of sovereignty, and the EU is trying to defend the EU competences through the treaty, and it's been challenged by Poland and some other countries. And we are heading towards a serious clash, and it's not being mediated in any way. And I think this is a very dangerous situation for the European Union.
Thank you very much, Judy. Much to unpack there, but thank you for attempting the impossible on a difficult question. Teresa, may I turn to you, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. You've done a lot of work on how the EU deals with these issues. So in your opinion, how does the way in which the EU deals with the question of enlargement contribute to the EU's reputation in a global context from a security point of view?
Yes, thank you, Ivan. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for listening in tonight. I did some work in security and defense policy, so I'm particularly interested in this aspect. How the EU deals with the question of enlargement contributes to the EU's reputation. It contributes to the image we have in the world, right? It is not being kept secret. In security policy, soft power and diplomacy and everything is extremely important. But when it comes to threat actors to security, other factors are very relevant. It is about, are you weak or are you strong? Can you be trusted? Do you stand behind your principles? Are you ready to spend money on your goals? Do you have strong alliances? Stuff like that. The EU's way of dealing with the question of enlargement, both with the Western Balkans and in a different way also with Turkey, contributes to how the EU is perceived as a global actor. So many factors that are relevant for the EU's performance and ability to act on a global stage can be observed in how the EU is dealing with the Balkans. So you can observe the EU's ability to build consensus among the member states and how long this takes. It takes long and sometimes it doesn't happen. It is rather easy to divide us alongside our different geopolitical interests within the EU. You can see how committed the EU is to defend its values abroad. The answer is sometimes not very committed, because otherwise European leaders would make a visit to Alexander Vučić in Serbia and tell him to stop basically screwing us over. They would have told Nikola Gruevski to pretty much stop everything he was doing in North Macedonia back then. And we would have our eye on corruption and state capture in most of the Balkans and call it out when it happens. We would make sure our message is clear and our voice is being heard. So you can also see how the EU reacts to competition showing up. The message we sent there is that we are pushover, basically. We are easy to confuse and irritate. You deny chair to our president of the commission and she says, instead of walking out of Erdogan. Then we talk about whether it was discrimination against a woman for 2 weeks and how it is all Charles Michel's fault. And all of this shows to anyone who wants to harm us that we're weak and easy to throw off our mission. The way we spend money, diplomatic abilities, the way we deal with crisis, how we deal with phenomena that affect our security, such as Russia and China doing a lot of work to embed themselves in the security infrastructure in the Western Balkan states, how respectful we are with other nations, religions, and the history weighing on their shoulders is also a factor. The way we say that the EU has given us 70 years of peace in Europe is completely ignoring that this is only true if you think the Balkans and Ukraine are not part of Europe and if you believe no European state has been to war in the meantime. It shows whether we keep our word, particularly when major elections are approaching in one of the member states. The answer is, well, we saw what happened with France having local elections when we talked about starting the accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. So we don't always keep our word, right? So you can see the actual effect the EU has in a region that is very close. It is not large, it is not populated by a lot of people, about 17 million, I think. It is of rather big geopolitical importance to us, and we share history and culture and all the other things so frequently mentioned. And still, we do not make great progress. It means we're weak. To others, it means we're weak. And in a world of realpolitik and strong competition of global leadership, that makes life rather dangerous for us. We're losing so much time with our schizophrenic, self-sabotaging Balkans policy that we have, that we should spend on things like building up resilience against cyber attacks that could cost a lot of lives, climate change that already costs a lot of lives and will cost many more. We take us out of the game all by ourselves. And finally, at the same time, we preach to our citizens that all the great challenges of today and tomorrow can be best addressed by the EU instead by the member states. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in the EU. I very strongly believed in the dream that we could become the best place on earth, that we would have the most freedom, wealth, and at the same time become better and better at inclusion and lifting people from poverty and provide them with opportunity regardless of whether they may live in Vienna, Paris, or a small town in Bosnia. And when I look at the past months and the frequent times when I felt embarrassed and ashamed by our highest leaders in the EU, I have all the best reasons not to believe in this dream anymore. The dreams of playing an important role in geopolitics in the future sound sometimes like a joke to me. And this is exactly what makes us very vulnerable to everyone who would like to attack us in any way. Actual attacks on our security, on our democratic systems, and we will pay a price. But apparently we're not scared enough of that yet. So we still sit on panels like this one and dream of a future when the role of the EU is really important in the world.
Thank you very much for that very clear, very strong message from a younger generation than mine. I think it's extremely important that we convey the feelings that we have along with the dreams and hopes that Europe will be the stable, secure place that upholds universal values in a world where those values are being challenged from different sides. But there are some very good stories, and I turn to Ioannis Thermakolas from Greece. The existence, Ioannis, of the EU and the promise of membership has led to some historical moments and compromises. Most recently, the one between North Macedonia and Greece called the Prespes Agreement. What lessons can we draw from the EU's geopolitical activity?
Thank you, Ivan, and thank you very much for the invitation for this panel. I would like to instill a bit more optimism after Teresa's kind of pessimistic assessment of how the EU is bullied or how the EU is unreliable. But I would like to start with the way that you phrased the question, Ivan, putting together historic and the membership perspective and European integration. I think it's absolutely spot on that we connect these two together. Of course, the Prespa agreement has been probably in recent times the most iconic of agreements in the region, but it has not been the only one. But in order to highlight the role of the EU in interesting ways to bring about change, I would like to make a distinction between two types of agreements, key agreements in the last 30 years, two generations, so to say. So the first generation of agreements, let's say it was the agreements of the 1990s, the ones that ended the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia. It was all about hard security considerations. And there the US had the central role. And one could, I think, very easily say the EU had a peripheral role. To put it in simple terms, one can imagine the end of the Bosnian War and the Dayton Agreement happening without the EU, but no one can imagine that this would happen without the US, simply put. But then we have more recently a second generation of agreements that are not about ending conflicts, but they are about preventing future instability. They are about political disputes. They are about political transformations. They are more future oriented. And for that reason, I think they are more amenable to the EU's soft role. The Prespa agreement is one, but also we could mention the agreement between Bulgaria and North Macedonia, or Croatia and Slovenia. And there, of course, you still have the role of the US, the diplomatic role of the US. Sometimes the US is even more visible than the EU. And this is because, of course, the actorness of the US, the diplomatic actorness is more unitary, or because the Western Balkan states have the expectation of the US role. But the important point I think I would like to make here is that all these processes that lead to such agreements are predicated on, they cannot possibly work without something that I could call deep impact of European integration and the European membership perspective. So even when we see the immediate effect of US diplomacy, US diplomatic hyperactivism, this could not happen without the long-term deep effect of the perspective of all these countries joining eventually the European Union. So in the first place, you need the promise by the EU in order to have something that is more visible like the US activity. Therefore, I think in such cases, you see a very catalytic role on the part of the EU in shaping the realm of possibilities and shaping the possibilities in a very positive way, even though it's not always appreciated and it's not always seen by everybody. And if this line of reasoning is correct, I think I would like to stress one optimistic conclusion and one point of caution. The optimistic conclusion comes first, of course, is that this transatlantic relationship between US and EU is still very important. If the US and the EU together can get the balance right, they can affect positive change in the region. They can have a division of labor. They can work together, all conditioned on European integration, of course, and they can bring real change. But that's the good news, of course, and there's always the more gray area, and this is the point of caution, or the note of caution I would like to highlight. Now, in this line of reasoning, the EU has deeper effect, immense leverage that is not easily seen by everybody. It has a powerful tool, but it is also a very ambiguous and ambivalent tool. It makes possible solutions in an unprecedented way. It makes possible solutions that would not have been possible without the EU influence. However, it does create dynamics of its own. For example, it empowers certain actors very often, or more often than not, member states, and disempowers other actors, again, more often than not, the candidate states. And therefore, the new balance that is created, the new dynamic, is very sensitive and it's volatile and it can backfire easily. For that reason, the EU must get the balance right on this. It should find a way to regulate the process of leading to agreements or leading to solutions of problems in order to offset the undue influence of member states. And also, it should make sure that the prospect of membership remains realistic. And this is where we come back to what Teresa said earlier. I think with these caveats, and if we realize the potential that the EU influence has, I think we can have a seriously greater geopolitical role of the EU and greater geopolitical power on the part of the EU.
Indeed, thank you very much, Ioannis. It's about taking the whole process into a higher gear with more engagement and more commitment, both in a geopolitical but also in a geo-economic sense. But we can come back to that. Srdjan Cvijic, I turn to you on some of these aspects that Ioannis has mentioned. You know, there's been a lot of thinking over these past 2 decades of how can the European Union be more proactive in bringing the candidates into the fold. So what is your view of what can be done to bring these countries to the EU table in a more proactive manner before they accede to full membership, so that they can start living and contributing to the EU in a variety of ways and domains?
Thank you, Ivan. I'm first of all, I would like to say that I'm so happy to be invited to the State of the Union event. It brings back fond memories when I attended a few of them as a PhD researcher at the UI back in the early 2000s. But to answer to your question, for a long time, many of us have been supporting this idea precisely, that bringing candidate countries to the EU table before EU membership should be a way to go forward. And this is already happening to a certain limited extent in some domains, such as not migration management, for example. However, it is important that this is not seen as an alternative to full membership. Full membership is the goal, not only in the interest of the Western Balkans countries that want to join the Union, but in the EU's own interest, really. President von der Leyen defined the European Commission's mandate when she started as a geopolitical one. And the only way for the EU to establish itself as a geopolitical power is first to assert its role in its own inner courtyard, which is the Western Balkans. And for the last 70 years, the EU was seeking to claim its spot as a global player with varying success. But the most successful policy to achieve this goal, without any doubt, and Judy talked about it, is EU's enlargement. And unlike other great powers, the EU strategy to achieve this goal combined the geopolitics with transformative aspirations of the countries seeking to join the Union. And many have used the example, we talked about it here as well, of the gradual growth of illiberal regimes in the EU, such as in Warsaw or Budapest, to argue that the transformational part of the enlargement policy did not work. But whereas this is up to debate whether enlargement in this sense worked or not, what is sure and what the example of the Western Balkans unambiguously demonstrate is that non-enlargement certainly doesn't work. And whereas in the past, the membership negotiations to join the EU lasted approximately from 2 to 8 years, accession talks with leading candidates today, Montenegro and Serbia, are proceeding at a hopelessly slow pace. Podgorica is negotiating for more than 8 years already, with no membership in sight, and Belgrade for 6. Other membership hopefuls, despite incredible achievements that Ioannis talked about, North Macedonia and Albania are saying to even begin the formal accession process, while Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo are lagging hopelessly behind. Kosovars, and please just pause for a moment and think about this. They're the only Europeans that still need a visa to enter the Schengen space. So the enlargement skepticism of some of the key EU member states has translated into this de facto policy of non-enlargement and has become, I must say, a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the result of the EU's wavering commitment to the region is twofold. Teresa mentioned both, so I will not repeat it, but in a nutshell, one is return of authoritarianism and nationalism in most of the candidate countries. And the second, equally worrying, is the penetration of other geopolitical or regional powers such as Russia, China, Turkey, that pursue their own, not always well-intentioned interests in the region. And let me focus on the second geopolitical challenge, and with this I'll finish. History offers lessons on how the EU can become truly geopolitical. 2 centuries ago, the US President James Monroe declared the Americas off limits to Britain, France, or any other outside power. Ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia has tried to assert, with varying success, its influence over what it calls the New World and keep away the West. China is pursuing the similar goals in part of Asia that it controls. So a cursory look at history suggests that no great power has ever managed to propel itself onto a global stage without first establishing its writ over its periphery. So the EU must establish its own benign version of the Monroe Doctrine, von der Leyen Doctrine, if you wish, declaring its own inner courtyard, Western Balkans, off limits to malign influence of other geopolitical powers. And the only way, really, to successfully achieve this goal is to once again be serious about the 6 Western Balkans countries' EU membership perspective.
Thank you, Srdjan. And clearly, there are complexities here because we know that the whole region literally depends on the European Union. You look at the trade figures, at the foreign direct investment figures. They are incomparable to anything that Russia or China or Turkey or the Emirates, for example, invest. And so there are the tools. We posed a polling question asking whether the EU Commission has the tools to pursue enlargement, and it's a very small sample, but 80% of people say yes, that the EU has the tools. So I think what we're talking about here is that the EU actually starts using these tools to their full extent. Judy, for this second and brief round, we have less than 20 minutes now to go. Ioannis very pointedly put something that we are all keenly aware of, that this is a transatlantic endeavor. Yes, the EU is in the driving seat. The US has acknowledged that, and that is right, because this is the geopolitical area where we're acting. But can the US play a role in enhancing what we're talking about here, giving it an additional push?
I better unmute.
No, you're okay. No, now you're muted. Now you're muted, Judy.
I'm using Zoom. I'm only joking. I think we should call a spade a spade. The whole idea of the European Union and the whole idea before the European community and the European steel and coal community, it was an American German Franco architecture, because the Americans realized that Europe is going to slip into another war if they don't get things together. And jumping quickly to Ioannis's country and Austria and my country, I'm from Ireland. The enlargement was an American endeavor as much as a European one. It was a Euro-Atlanticist endeavor. And when 1989 came, and there was an awful lot of skepticism inside the EU, as you remember, Ivan, the Americans pushed for it. And without the Americans, without the United States administration, this consistent intellectual and political and indeed passionate commitment to European unification, we wouldn't have got where we are without the Americans when we look at the current state of enlargement. It is unbelievable. We've brought in the Spaniards, we brought in Portuguese, these are authoritarian regimes, quasi-fascist, we brought in Greece, then there was Austria, we brought in this extraordinary swathe of countries. We couldn't have done it without the United States. So, getting to your question, where are we now? Leaving aside President Biden's focus on China, and he's right to focus on China, and he's right to say to Europeans, get your act together. Actually, there's a culture inside the State Department, inside the Pentagon, and inside the people working with Biden that it's very important to get European integration finished. This is the first thing. It's really very important. The Americans are so active in the Western Balkans. The Europeans are so divided. The North looks at Russia, the Southerners look at North Africa, and there's the middle ground with Germany trying to do this, the economic areas. We have to be very serious about integrating Europe. It's not very nice. It's very difficult. There's this perception it's all corrupt, and there's migration, and there's drug trafficking. It's got to be done on a big, massive communication element and a financial element, and really take on China. This is our neighbor. And Srdjan mentioned it. It's our neighbor. And if we don't get our neighbor right, we haven't a chance. And this is crucial. We're going to need the United States on this, and it'll be very interesting to see what kind of ambassadors that the State Department appoints to this region. The more we can have this Euro United States tandem, the better for everybody, frankly, and a real signal to Russia and China.
Thank you, Judy. Coming to you, Teresa, on this issue of democracy and democratic conditionality, that I think we're all agreeing more should be done, and the requirements for the rule of law. In fact, Josep Borrell, the High Rep for Foreign and Security Policy, mentioned that very clearly to President Vučić when he was in Brussels just a week ago, that this will be a key measure of the advancement in the accession process. How do you see this being further enhanced? For example, there's a lot of talk, and there has been for ages, about variable geometry, small groups of countries rallying on certain issues. We know that foreign policy requires unanimity, unfortunately. Do you see a scope for countries that are really interested in this area to coalesce and be the drivers of the enlargement?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about this the way I think about the defense policy, right? Because we have a similar situation there. Some countries would like to go faster, move faster on mutual defense of the European Union. Others won't. The thing is, with everything that we have done in terms of strategies and ideas, how to improve the rule of law situation and the quality of democracy in the Western Balkans, these are all good ideas and legitimate proposals. We've had them in writing, we had press conferences on them, but the thing is, they're all not legally binding, right? Nobody has to do anything because of the Western Balkans strategy, you know? So what I was always looking for is a way to find something, at least something that is morally binding or something for a number of countries that are very engaged in the Western Balkans, such as my own country. Austria is one of the biggest promoters of Western Balkans enlargement in the European Union. Despite its advocacy against migration and all the other things, we still, as a country, you mentioned the cliches, Judy, it still has this impression, but still Austria promotes it. So what I want is basically the countries that are doing this anyway, supporting the Western Balkans enlargement, to get together, make a to-do list, no matter how small for the moment, just to get something done, like fight air pollution in cities in the Western Balkans. Let's just do that for the moment, so people can breathe. It's not totally out of this world, you know. We could do that, right? We could openly say, okay, we are going to do this until date X. Please review us after 2 years or 1 year or something and measure our progress. And we would have gotten something done that we can show off, not only to the Western Balkans, but also to the citizens of the European Union member states that have to approve of our way forward in elections every time, in national elections. So we need to show them there is hope for progress. If we, you know, do not try to discuss every little detail on the whole European Union scale, but, you know, some things, just fix it in small working groups and fix it soon. And I think that would also help with improving the quality of life in the Western Balkans. Will do a lot to all the other problems there. It will set something in motion. If you can see as a normal citizen that things have improved for your life directly, and the EU has done it because the EU has talked about it for the whole year before. So it's not a silent, we're building railways here and there, and then China comes and says, Silk Road Initiative, we're building all your, and everybody thinks again that China is giving the most money in the Western Balkans. So as you said, Judy, communication efforts there, also very interesting and badly needed. And also, it's something that European member states can sell. It's something like where they have been the hero in the story. You know, it's not we're not the ones being screwed over by the Western Balkans. No, it's a hero story. We fixed the problem. I want this. I want to see this happening. Actually.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's been again a cliche that the European Union does not know how to sell itself, even though that it is a winner and has been, given the anchoring that has occurred. All of these countries want to join. And I like to say, if we have a referendum on Sunday in all of these countries, we'd have clear majorities of people wanting to join. There were things along the way. For example, the visa-free regime was a huge thing. People have advocated, and I support that. Why not have free roaming charges for this island, this inner courtyard of Europe? That's happening, thank God, at the level of the region. As of July 1st, there won't be roaming charges between the 6 countries. So an important step, but I think the EU could go beyond that and simply show that you are a part of us, even though you're not a full member. Ioannis, from this vantage point, from where you are, Greece is at the southeastern end of the European Union. There's this empty geographical space with regard membership in between you and for example, Italy and Austria. Yes, you can go through neighboring EU member states, Bulgaria, Romania, etc., but the roads are not good. How do you see the need for greater geo-economic understanding on the part of the EU that it can do more? And we have heard something now, again, from last Monday, that von der Leyen promised a big, apparently 700 million euros for a high-speed connection between Belgrade, North Macedonia, and that means obviously Greece.
Thank you, Ivan. Definitely, and I will get back to that in a minute. Definitely, the cost of non-accession or non-enlargement for Greece and countries like Bulgaria or Romania will be immense, and I don't think it's fully appreciated in our countries.
That's absolutely a key point. The cost of non-accession. You're right.
Exactly. Let me get back to that in a minute, though. I like the fact that you mentioned the perspective of Greece, and I would like to widen it a bit to say the perspective of Southern Europe, so that I give a bit of context, because I think we fail to realize the importance of the process in the Western Balkans because we don't compare it with previous cases. There is in political science, you are all aware of it, a consensus that the Southern European process of democratic consolidation and modernization has been immensely aided, helped by the process of acceding to the European Union and by the European Union membership. So Greece, Portugal, Spain are healthy democracies today because they became members of the European Union. That is, we call it today European Union. And you know what? They became the best disciples. Don't forget that during the worst economic crisis in decades, they had remarkable resilience in their democratic institutions. Greece, Spain, Portugal. You had turmoil, you had economic meltdown in Greece, at least at the level of the one you had during the Weimar Republic in Germany, right? You had a change of political parties, political elites, but the democratic institutions stayed, persisted, remained. In Western, many people forget, in Western European countries, a few years ago, we were called pigs. The acronym Portugal, Ireland, Spain, Greece, and Spain. Well, those pigs remained democratic and remained pro-European at a level even of more than other more established democracies, so democracies with longer record. So this is very important to keep in mind. But mind you, Greece joined the European, whatever we call today, European Union, 7 years after the end of dictatorship, and Spain and Portugal 12 years after the start of the transition. This year is 30 years from the start of transition in Albania, 31 years in North Macedonia. So these countries, they more than 3 decades after the start of the transition, they still cannot start accession negotiations. And Greece and Portugal and Spain, within 10, maximum 15 years, they were members of the European Union. Now, we put in the place of Albania or North Macedonia or Bosnia or Kosovo, any country in the world, that they have to stay in the Europe's waiting room for as long as they had been under dictatorship, under authoritarian rule. And you will see the effects in domestic settings, political settings, in the mentalities of the people. It's simple as that. You should put any country there, Germany, Austria, and you see the effect that that has on the mentality of the people. Now, democratic conditionality, rule of law conditionality is crucial. But very quickly, I would like to point to two sets of, I think, narrow-mindedness. I will not call it hypocrisy, but narrow-mindedness on the part of EU member states, because we always talk about the deficiencies of the Western Balkans. Let's see a bit the side of the European Union, like Teresa mentioned earlier. First set of narrow-minded politics. The countries, EU member states that are in the neighborhood of the Western Balkans, like Greece, like Bulgaria, Croatia, you know, the first thing, and very often the only thing they care about is the conditionality that has to do with minorities, disputes, so-called national interest questions. They don't really care and they don't really do much about democracy and rule of law issues in the Western Balkans. And they should be doing more, because they should think what will be the effect for all these countries, but also for the entire region and for EU member states if those reforms fail, democracy and rule of law reforms fail in the Western Balkans. And the second set of narrow-minded politics, and I will close with that, Ivan, it's Western European countries. I will not mention any here, but you know which ones I have in mind. The typical, the classic EU enlargement blockers, you know. They instrumentalize rule of law problems which are existing, okay? No question about it, to frustrate the enlargement. That's what they're doing. And I think this is a very important fallacy, because they think somehow they can create a cordon sanitaire around the Western Balkans. They can seal off the Western Balkans and the effects of the collapse of rule of law regimes or democracies in the Western Balkans. Well, you know what? It's not going to fly. If the rule of law regimes fail in these countries and democracies fail in these countries, without the EU transformational effect, the negative side effects will be for everybody, for all EU member states. It's not going to be only for the Western Balkans. We cannot seal off the Western Balkans. And I will close here. I'm sorry if I've taken too long.
No, thank you, Ioannis. You made some very important points, but most importantly, I think the vantage point from Southern Europe is extremely important. And to state the obvious, the Balkan Peninsula is one of the three Southern European peninsulas, with the Iberian and the Apennine Peninsula. And thus what you talked about the democratic transition after dictatorship is very pertinent to this. I come to Srdjan before we close, and if we have a minute or two extra at the end, I'll ask for some final one-sentence thoughts. As Yanni just mentioned, I think this is an important point, throwing the ball into the court of EU member states. Srdjan, domestic politics in EU member states somehow gets into the weeds of enlargement because of elections, local, national, and the like. And the European family of parties, the EPP and others, also have their agendas, which somehow seem to slow down what is in the geopolitical interest further. You conducted recently a research in France about this. Can you very briefly say something about this issue? Unmute, please.
Yes, indeed. We conducted the research and polling throughout the pandemic here in France and published the findings in February. And you would be surprised to learn, before we started, bearing in mind the politicization of the enlargement issue in France, that no French political party has conducted targeted research on enlargement. Yet they oppose it, having in mind internal politics. So to truly understand their own electorate would help the EU be more geopolitical. But what our research shows is completely contrary to the superficial opinion polls for years that show that French electorate is against enlargement. Our research, an arguably largest ever sample, combining it with a mixed methodology of focus groups looking deep into the issue, concluded that unlike the EU membership of Turkey, for example, the Western Balkans accession is not an important issue for the French electorate, and that pursuing that goal of an accelerated entry of Belgrade, Podgorica, and others in the Union would certainly not cost President Macron re-election in 2022, or in that sense, in any other election. And what is interesting is that as many as 43% of the participants of our focus groups changed their opinion about enlargement, mainly from negative to positive, when they were shown the actual map of the region with respect to the rest of the Union encircling it. Little importance of the region to the French electorate, of course, it needs to be said, has to be combined with little knowledge about the Balkans. And across all focus groups that we conducted, including some of the hard opponents of enlargement, participants recognized that the integration of these 6 countries of the Western Balkans into the EU would bring a geopolitical advantage to France.
Okay, thank you very much, Srdjan. We have a few seconds left. We've been allowed a minute, so with the prerogative of the chair, I will take up that minute to conclude. First of all, by thanking you all. I think this was a punchy, very clear message that we sent on these various topics. I think that not to summarize, but to state a few points that are very clear. I think that I can speak for all of us in saying that opening, for example, talks with North Macedonia and Albania as soon as possible is of the essence, because it shows the strategic geopolitical willingness of the European Union to move forward. There was a comment about giving us small things like visas, roaming charges, etc. This is obviously no substitute for full membership. The other thing is that regional cooperation is fundamental. And if we in the region can show that we are capable of European behavior in the region, again, this is no substitute for membership. But as we move forward, there are ways in which we can be European, espouse European values, put them into practice, and move forward. So I think that the conclusion, a geopolitical Europe needs to live up to its promises, and obviously the member states to live up to the fact that they need to become more democratic and that there needs to be more rule of law. On that note, once again, thank you very much. Stay tuned with the State of the Union in Florence, and for the rest of us around a variety of European capitals, thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Srdjan. Thank you, Johannes. See you soon.
You all soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.